My name is Shelby Ghiotto, and this presentation will focus on effective vocabulary instruction. The central question is, how can primary teachers effectively integrate meaningful vocabulary lessons into their literacy block? The target audience are K through 2 teachers. The purpose of the presentation, like I've already shared, is to share some research-based best practices that teachers in the primary grades can use in their classroom. In order to become successful readers and writers, students need to develop something called word consciousness, or an appreciation for words and language. Students also need to develop morphological awareness, which is an understanding of root word meanings, suffixes, prefixes, and grammatical inflections. Vocabulary learning is most effective whenever it involves students' active engagement. Just teaching vocabulary through isolated dictionary lessons is not enough. We must consciously extend vocabulary knowledge of our students by using rich vocabulary ourselves and by teaching words directly and indirectly through explicit instruction and teachable moments. Vocabulary instruction that is integrated across all content areas is more meaningful. And the three important effective vocabulary instruction principles that I'll go into in this presentation involve multiple exposures with a deep understanding and connected to what students already know. Other scholars also believe that lots of repetition, explicit teaching, and providing opportunities for students to represent words in many different ways are all key components to successful vocabulary instruction. Three key components mentioned in our textbook, as well as other articles that I'll refer to, involve integration, which means, including vocabulary learning in all content areas, lots of repetition. Sometimes it takes more than 20 exposures for a word to fully be acquired. And then offering lots of meaningful uses and purposeful uses of the words makes vocabulary instruction more intentional for students. Marzano is most well known for teaching ELL's academic vocabulary. He has a 6-step process that you can use. The first step is to provide a description or explanation of the word. Then you ask the students to restate the description and explain it in their own words. Then they can create a picture or symbol to represent the word. And then you can engage them in different activities like acting it out, to solidify their learning, and then you can ask students to discuss it with each other in their own words and use their native language when appropriate. And then you can also create different word games to develop word consciousness and to help them acquire new learning. Here's an example of a vocabulary Foursquare sheet that helps students go through the 6-step process. They can save this in a vocabulary journal or vocabulary folder to refer back to. Another researcher is Graves, which our textbook also refers to his work. He suggests providing extensive independent reading opportunities for students to expand their word knowledge. The more books students read, the more opportunities they will get to add vocabulary to their language. Explicit instruction with words enhances comprehension of text. We also need to provide explicit instruction in word learning strategies, which can happen oftentimes in guided reading in the primary grades. And then we definitely want to develop word consciousness, which is what I'll focus on in the application process, and wordplay activities to enhance learning. So the way that I synthesized all this information was to apply vocabulary lessons into a unit where students will be writing fictional stories with beginning, middles, and ends, and they'll be using adjectives to describe different characters in their story, mostly to describe their main character. So the goal was to get students to notice interesting adjectives in mentor texts, to collect those words in a word bank or in a million-dollar word book, which I'll refer to later, and to develop an appreciation for interesting words. So the focus was to build word consciousness and to get my first graders thinking about interesting words. I provided the teak here, which was this is just one of the many different teaks that we hit, but this was the main one. And so I also started off the unit by reading these two books, which are awesome for getting kids to really think about interesting words. We started a $1,000,000 word chart, which I'll go into, but we began the unit with adjectives. So we read the book, How Big Could Your Pumpkin Grow? And the kids wrote different sticky notes to describe it. We also did this by having a volunteer stand up in our classroom who was comfortable with this, and we described a little girl in our class using positive adjectives, and we actually stuck the sticky notes on her, and the kids loved it. It was a really fun activity. So throughout reading different spooky stories aloud, this was a Halloween unit, I read a lot of different stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end with interesting characters to model what a good story would look like for them, because again, they were going to create their own eventually. And we started a chart called a $1,000,000 word chart, and each time students would hear a word that they found to be interesting, they would give me jazz hands as a symbol during the read aloud to stop and write a new word onto our $1,000,000 word chart. It didn't have to necessarily be an adjective, but oftentimes the words were adjectives that we ended up putting on our list. And students actually got their own $1,000,000 word book. They could collect words in to and refer back to, and they kept this in their writing folder so that they could use it at Writer's Workshop or during writing station. And here's an example of a student using their $1,000,000 word book to collect some words that they found interesting. So then the unit began after we really dove into adjectives and character traits. Students actually created a pre-write of their character. I wanted them to really plan using adjectives that made sense for their character. And here you can see that they were really trying to apply some of the adjectives that we were talking about to describe their character that they would make a story about. This character has lots of different interesting adjectives. Most of the characters were villains because, like I said, it was Halloween and they wanted to do spooky characters. So here are some different adjectives to describe this character. And, you know, again, careful, quick, bully, creepy. These are not typical words that students were used to using, so it really puts them out of their comfort zone. Ghoulish, gloomy. You can see that some of them weren't quite sure what all the meanings were, but for the most part, it really made sense for what their character looked like. And after planning their characters, we took it to the next step and created books. Some students chose to co-author a book. They got, if their character was a hero, they would find a student in the class that wrote about a villain, and they combined their characters into a story using those interesting adjectives in the book. The two that I've given examples of here were independent writers who wrote the book on their own. The student needed a little bit more support, so I'll show two different levels of writing. But he did try to write, you know, that it was a lonely day, that it was boring in the graveyard all alone. So these are not normal words for this student to use. This was really showing that he was applying those adjectives. And again, he's using lonely and bored. And then here, this student needed a lot less support. But you can see him applying those adjectives. This character is selfish, he's rude, he's quite picky. And you can see that he goes through a transformation in the book. This really made kids much more conscious of interesting words. And since then, I've seen them really challenging themselves to use more $1,000,000 words in their writing. So throughout the unit, I definitely had to differentiate a bit for my English language learners. So some strategies that you can use to support students as they're learning new words are to link speaking, reading, and writing together. Try and teach words that are linked. So if you're teaching about transportation, you can teach all the different forms of transportation. Try to umbrella your instruction a bit so they can make more connections. Use lots of pictorial support. So when we were learning about character traits, for some of my students who struggled, I pulled out different pictures of emotions and different traits to show them visuals, and that really seemed to help them plan for their character. Pronounce the word, use the word in sentences to help them understand what it means. Give them opportunities to turn and talk. So when we got to an interesting word, I would have students turn and talk and infer what the word could mean based on clues in the text and what they already know about the root word. And that really helped them develop a connection to the word and understand what it could mean. They would act out the word, which we did quite a few times for different adjectives and different verbs for sure, a good opportunity to do that. And then it's important to teach the conventions of the English language to help students understand that words have roots and that sometimes they have prefixes and suffixes, and all of that can help them understand the meaning of the word. And then cognates are important for English language learners. Some other strategies that you can use are the outside-inside strategy, where students look at the word and then they read around it to try and understand its meaning in the book. You can use semantic word maps, which is a type of mapping where they say what the word is not, what it is, and what it's like. You can also do word associations, where students do a foursquare and they write words that are similar to a certain word that they're learning. And then you can do a word line. Like, for instance, if the word is to crawl, you can move throughout the word line to stroll, to walk, to run, to sprint. You can show different variations in the type of word. And then pinch paper activity is where you divide a paper into two parts with a 1 and a 2, and students pinch the correct number after you have read a sentence with a word in it. So that's another thing that you can use. Here are the references. I really like the Butler article, and I provided the link there. That way you can refer to it. It provides a literature review of lots of different theories on vocabulary instruction. I hope you found this helpful. Good luck and thank you.